What is in your cup? I want to share with you a passage from Luke chapter 6, verses 43 through 45, which will be the basis of what we'll be talking about for the next few minutes. For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil man out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. This is a very simple, easy to understand principle. What is in a cup is what can or will spill out of that cup. And that which causes the cup to spill is anything that might go wrong in your life. If you were coming out of a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts and someone bumped into you, very rudely bumped into you, and coffee sloshed out of your coffee cup, it's pretty easy to understand. Coffee is in that cup. If tea comes out of it, hot tea, that's what you have in that cup. What is in a cup is what can and will spill out of that cup. There are things that can cause that cup to spill, but our lives are cups as well. And when things go wrong in our lives, what is going to come out? There's several biblical examples of this principle of what is in your cup. Do you remember reading about Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11? Ananias and Sapphira were members of the church, early in that church, perhaps from the day of Pentecost when about 3,000 were baptized. And the church there struggled because many had come who did not have the means to support themselves. Jews who came for the Feast of Pentecost, who became Christians, who wanted to stay in Jerusalem. And so brethren contributed out of their own means to help those who were poor and needy. Ananias and Sapphira saw what others were doing, and they chose to do something as well. They had property, they sold it, they brought it to the apostles, laid the money at their feet. Ananias came first, and he was asked, is this what you sold your property for? And he said, yes. And Peter immediately identified him as one who was lying, that he had sold it for a lot more. It was his to give. He didn't have to give all of it. A part of it would have been fine. But he said that was all of it. And so he was struck dead immediately. His wife came in a little while later, and the same thing happened to her. The problem was that the truth bumped into them. And what came out of their cup? It's clear what was in their cup: greed and pride and lies. What came out of their cup, their life, is what was in their lives. Then you know the story of Cain in Genesis chapter 4, the first 12 verses. Cain and Abel each had brought a sacrifice to the Lord, and because of faith by which he offered it, Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's was rejected. And Cain was not happy at all. What bumped into Cain was a sacrifice that was rejected. What came out of the cup when it was bumped was jealousy. He was jealous. He was angry with his brother Abel, and took him off, led him off into a field where he killed him. Cain's life was filled with jealousy, and when his life was bumped, that's what came out of it. You know the story of the Israelites as Moses went back into Egypt and led the children of Israel out of Egypt toward the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. And the four books of the Old Testament, the second through the fifth, Exodus through Deuteronomy, tell us of their journey away from Egypt as they went through the Sinai Peninsula and eventually, many years later, into the land of Canaan. But you know, it wasn't very long, just 2.5, 3 months into this journey, that they lamented that they had ever left Egypt. And they asked Aaron, Moses' brother, to build them a golden calf to remind them of the gods, the idols who were worshipped in Egypt. What was wrong with the Israelites was their warped, skewed memory of Egypt. All they could think of was the fact that they ate their fill, that their food was seasoned with onions, with leeks, and that they weren't living in a desert, eating this manna every day, and looking for water coming out of a rock. That was the problem with them as they were bumped into. And what came out of their cup? What came out of their cup was going back into idolatry. Their cup was a lack of faith. Their cup was a lack of trust in God. And that's what came out of it when things went wrong. Do you remember the Old Testament personalities, Samson, Solomon, and Amnon, who is the son of David? We read about these in Judges 14, 15, and 16, 1 Kings 11, and 2 Samuel 3. Their problem was that each of them was with a mindset that focused on their desire for women. And of course, as Solomon is portrayed here, Solomon was led into idolatry because of the women that he took to wife. Samson, Solomon, and Amnon, each one had a lack of personal discipline in his life. That's what was wrong with them. And when someone bumped into them, when something went wrong, what came out was this inordinate desire for women. That's what was in their cups. Do you remember the story of Judas? It was in chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, that John records for us. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. There they made a supper. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at table with him. Mary took a pound of costly ointment of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the ointment. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and as he had the money box, he used to take what was put into it. If you note the picture that Leonardo da Vinci drew, painted this fresco of the Last Supper, you will see the third person to the left of Jesus, to Jesus's right, to our left, That man was presented as Judas. If you see in his right hand, he is holding a money bag. Judas was tempted, was bumped into, was troubled with the supposed waste of the oil. When he was jostled, what came out from him was this thinking that the money for the sale of this oil could have been given to the poor, but that's not what was in his cup. In his cup was the love of money. I don't want you to think that all biblical examples are bad. They're not all bad. There's so many that are good, but I think of Abigail. Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25. David was fleeing from Saul. David had already been anointed to be the next king of Israel, but as long as Saul was reigning, David could not be in his presence because Saul hated David. David had a ragtag army put together of misfits and such, and even though this was not an organized army of Israel, yet David led these men, and in this particular case, they had protected the flocks of Nabal, Abigail's husband, from those who would steal and from animals who would kill. And so he came to the region of Nabal and asked for some sustenance, provisions for his army. And Nabal said, absolutely not. Now, David would have gone in and killed Nabal, but Abigail came out and placated David with her pleas for her husband. Abigail had a lousy husband whose response to David could have led to the death of her entire family. But in Abigail's cup was kindness and generosity. And so when troubles or difficulty came, when Abigail was, as it were, bumped into, what came out of her cup was a kind heart and provisions that she brought for David and for his men. And because of that, she saved her life, and the life of all of her family and servants. Consider also the life of Jesus. You could look at the life of Jesus at any time in his ministry, from Matthew through John. Uh, Jesus, we know, came into a world which, for the most part, rejected him. When I think of the life of Jesus, I think of the Beatitudes. When Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, and the gentle, and those who mourn, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and blessed are the merciful, and the pure in heart, and the persecuted, and the peacemakers." Jesus identified, in reality, what was in his cup. He displayed who he was when the world rejected him, yet what came from his cup were these 8 Beatitudes. We remember, as we read about his life and his ministry, for the most part, he was rejected. But his cup displays these Beatitudes that he spoke of first in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verses 2 through 11. The principle that our text presented to us this morning is what really we are looking for. When Jesus says, what is seen in our lives, what is heard from our mouths, is evidence of what is in our cups. And so let me ask the question, what is in your cup? What is in your cup? What happens when someone speaks badly of you? For sure, this is an issue when we are troubled. This is an issue when we are, in a way, bumped into, when things have gone wrong. What do you do when someone speaks badly of you? What comes out of your cup? Do you pray for them? Or do you hold a grudge forever? What's in your cup? What's in your cup? Every day as we drive around, we see crazy drivers on the road, especially the expressways. Someone cuts you off in traffic. What is your response to that? You've been wronged. What comes out of your cup? Are you thankful that no one was hurt by their poor driving? Is that what comes out of your cup? Or do you revert to your days of bad language and bad gestures? What's in your cup? What comes out of your cup? That comes from your heart. I know you know that. Let's make it a little bit more personal. As we sit in church now, gratefully, for our fourth Sunday in a row, what do you do? What is your response when you don't like the songs, or you're not happy with the sermon that you hear in church? What comes out of your cup? Do you look for the joy and satisfaction in others around you? If I have made any disparaging remark about a song that I was not comfortable with, I always find people who are challenged by that song and are encouraged by the words of that song. And it makes me want to look for the joy and satisfaction that others have. Or on your way home from church, do you have what some people say and call fried preacher or seared song leader for lunch? Is this what your children hear from you and your spouse and others around you as you leave church? You don't like the songs or the sermon in the church you've been bumped into. What comes out of your cup? What comes out? So, the main point, I suppose, is to know what is in your cup. If you don't like what is coming out of it, then change the contents. Romans chapter 12 would be a wonderful place to learn and to start from. If you would please, go with me to Romans chapter 12, and let's read a few verses. Verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And now go with me down to verse 9. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Never flag in zeal. Be aglow with the Spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in your hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. I trust that your cup is filled with these wonderful qualities and challenges that Paul puts before us in this 12th chapter of Romans. Examine your cup. Make sure that when you are wronged, and you will be, when you are jostled, and you will be, when you are bumped into, and you will be, make sure that what comes out of these wonderful qualities that Jesus and God put before us. Thank you for listening. God bless.